Hello, I'm Ray Paprocki, publisher of Dispatch Magazines, which includes Columbus CEO. Welcome to the second of our four-part webinar series called Diverse Leaders in Law. Diverse Leaders in Law is a quarterly discussion with local thought leaders focused on advancing gender and racial equity in the legal profession during a critical period. We're excited to work with our sponsors, Barnes & Thornburg and Frost Brown Todd, on this digital and print initiative. Today's topic is Pathways to Partnership. Our esteemed panel includes Yvette Mcgee Brown, partner in charge of diversity, inclusion, and advancement at Jones Day; Terry Meldrum, senior vice president and general counsel at Ohio Health; David Paragas, partner at Barnes & Thornburg; and Jennifer Regler, member at Frost Brown Todd. First, a few words from the managing partner at Frost Brown Todd, Noelle Shepard. Noelle?
Thank you, Ray. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Columbus CEO for giving us a chance to sponsor these discussions. We feel like they are very important. Last discussion talked about our firm, and this time I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do to encourage law students that are diverse and females. Frost Brown Todd created a scholarship program several years ago, and this year we just awarded 6 scholarships to law students throughout our footprint. We have to apply and provide information about their experience and what they plan to do with their scholarship money and their legal career. So it's just a little piece of what we're trying to do to encourage diverse law students and females to use their career to move the needle a little bit. So congratulations to those recipients, and thank you again for having us. Back to you, Ray.
Sure, thanks, Noelle, and thanks to Frost Brown Todd. And now I'd like to introduce Katie Smith. She's the editor of Columbus CEO and today's moderator of the panel, which is entitled Pathways to Partnership. Katie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today for this important discussion. We know that one of the major ways that companies can strive to support having more diverse ranks of leadership is helping people make partner. But that's pretty hard for anyone, and it's more difficult for people who come from backgrounds that may give them obstacles. And so we have this great panel here who are going to tell you about what are the obstacles to building a book of business. What is the work-life balance situation, especially for people who are raising children? How do you help people feel like they fit in and that their voices are valued? How do you overcome cultural barriers? Because it's a place of work, but there's always a social component. It's all important. And also talking about how in-house attorneys and people in large organizations, not necessarily law firms, can raise their profiles. They face many of the same challenges that people within law firms face. And so something I've heard in talking to people in the legal profession is that building a book of business is huge in making partner, of course. And so I just love to hear what our panelists have to say about what are the obstacles to building a book of business and how can firms support young attorneys in doing so. So maybe we'll just kick it off with Yvette Mcgee Brown.
Oh, great. So hi, everyone. Certainly every law firm is different, right? So I describe it, and our firm is different because we're global. It's less really for us about building a book of business as it is about building your internal client base. So I say to young associates when they come on board, partners are your first clients. You need to make sure that those partners see value in what you bring, that you're the person they want to go to work on their matters. And to partners, I have to say, you have to avoid the mini-me concept, right? We're all human. And the people we're going to gravitate to are the people most like ourselves, the people who remind us of ourselves. And so it's really a challenge to get partners to step outside of their comfort zone and go to that person they think they don't have anything in common with and find out once they've met them that they actually do. That's how you help build your value inside a law firm. And once you build your value, the work is going to come. Jennifer?
Yeah, if I could just chime in on that, that's an excellent point. Our firm is a little bit more traditional where we do work on clients. We work on clients as teams, so that definitely helps. We have a range of associates who will help serve a client. I actually serve as the law director for the city of Dublin. Dublin is one of our larger clients. And so I've got the opportunity to kind of have the best of both worlds. I've got the private law firm, but also I'm general counsel to an entity. And so with a larger entity as a client, you will have a group of people. I have 50 attorneys, almost 50 attorneys from FBT work on Dublin matters. And so you get an opportunity as a younger associate to get that direct client contact in a lot of different circumstances at FBT. And some of the best advice that I received was make contacts within your level, your commensurate level of that organization, client organization, because then what happens is that person will grow as you grow. You've got a client contact there. We've had just last year had an example where a top person at one of the clients went to another entity and then hired us based on the relationship with that other firm. I completely agree with Yvette. As an associate, the partners are your primary client. And so doing good work for the partner is what's important at that stage. But making the connections you can at your level is helpful as well.
Yeah, and this is Terry. Just I think Jennifer and Yvette are spot on taking that concept from the perspective of the client, being in-house and working with many large law firms. That is absolutely the way that young associates can really build a book of business, is to build those connections with inside the client that are appropriate and certainly that are meaningful to the work that you're doing. But I will tell you from an in-house perspective, any of the audience that happens to be in-house, I will tell you we have some responsibility in also making sure that those young associates know our business and build connections within the client. I think we all have an obligation to know who the young associates are that are working on our accounts, understand what value they bring to the table, and make sure that they have a good experience in understanding the work that we do. And that benefits not only the young associates and their ability to develop within the firm, but it helps us because then the people working on our work know our business, know us as a client, and know the type of work and the type of work product that we want to see. So I think as an in-house lawyer, we also have an obligation to make sure that we reach out as much as the young associates are reaching in.
If I could add to that, Katie, I had a different pathway to joining a larger firm. I started with a small regional firm, and I was the only lawyer in the Columbus office as a first-year lawyer. And so that presented a lot of challenges. And I remember the day after I passed the bar exam, the managing partner called me up and said to me, "What are you going to do?" And I happened to have the bar directory open, and I saw one lawyer listed under immigration. And he said to me, "Well," I said, "I want to be an immigration lawyer." He said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, there's only one other lawyer in Columbus that does that." And so for about a dozen years, I practiced immigration law. But what I learned was the most important aspect was identifying a role model, somebody who I wanted to design my practice afterward or emulate my practice. And once I figured out who that person was, I wanted to do a balance of legislative affairs and practicing law. I reached out to that person and said, "Can I meet with you 3 or 4 times to talk about how you developed your practice?" And the first piece of advice that that person gave to me, and I'm happy to share who that was, it was Rocky Saxby. He said to me, "Become an expert. Become an expert in something so that you're known for something." He said, "Write about it, talk about it, and let people know that you do it." And that's how I started to develop my book of business.
David, did anyone tell you to find a mentor, or did you just read that somewhere. And what was that like the first time you reached out to Rocky? Were you scared? And how did he react?
So for those of you who know Rocky Saxby, it was like he was waiting for my call. He was, I think, thrilled that I was calling him, but it was really out of necessity that I did that. I was sitting in an office by myself, didn't have other lawyers around to help me. They were all in Cleveland. It was just an unusual circumstance, so I did it out of necessity. And from that, you know, I realized how important mentorship was and being a role model and seeking role models. And I think as lawyers, we all have that obligation to be role models for younger lawyers and especially lawyers of color.
You know, David raises a good point, because I think for any lawyer, no matter your ethnicity or diversity, if you're going to be successful, you have to be willing to extend yourself. What David did was brilliant. He reached out to somebody whose career he admired and asked them, you know, how can I be like you? And he was intentional about those meetings. I get people who call me and ask me questions, but they really haven't thought through what they want. They're like, oh, can I take you to lunch? But then they don't have an agenda. They just start chatting. And it's really a waste of time. If you want to develop as a lawyer, you're going to have to take charge of your career. We know you're smart. We hired you because you're smart, but you're not going to advance just sitting in your office waiting on somebody to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you're brilliant. Come and work for me. You've got to be a go-getter and a self-starter.
And if I could chime in on that, that's another point, is a lot of this is we have a responsibility as mentors to be there, to be this resource. I've had some amazing mentors in my career, but there is the obligation on the associate, or whenever you're fighting for yourself in an organization, you have an obligation to be to take action as well. I have a story like with client development. You know, sometimes you can get into situations where you feel like I'm the one who's responsible for this client, and I should have more of a role. I should be doing, and you have to let the partner know that too. You have to advocate for yourself as part of the whole process.
Katie, since we're talking about mentoring, I really want to emphasize that you really, in developing your career and your profession, you need 3 mentors. You need someone within your practice group or your area of discipline to teach you the trade and the practice. Somebody who is going to be as disciplined as you are in learning that practice. Now, that person may not be your ideal person to be compatible with. So you need somebody within the firm that will be your independent advocate, somebody to help promote you, somebody that you can be your authentic self with and you can feel safe with, and saying, hey, the partner I'm working with is a real jerk. He's brilliant or she's brilliant, but I just don't get along. How do I work through those issues and make sure that I'm on the right track? That other mentor will help you navigate your way through the firm. And then something that I think is very important, particularly if you're trying to build your practice and your reputation in the community, is having a mentor in the community. In my instance, it was Janet Jackson. Janet Jackson helped me navigate social service and volunteerism and really taught me the way. And I always tell young lawyers, when you sit at that board table, when you're working side by side with the CEOs or the general counsels of that board table, you're equivalent regardless of what their age is, because you're there for a common purpose. That opens a lot of doors and it teaches a lot about organizations. So if you have those 3 mentors, you're going to be successful, and be diligent about that.
And I would add to that, I think that's a really great point and really well said, David. And I would add maybe a 4th category to that. Don't be afraid to try and find mentors within your client base. You know, again, appropriately talk to partners, and you don't want to go in a direction that isn't otherwise appropriate. But there are a lot of in-house lawyers in large legal departments in large organizations across the city, and maybe they're not a client, but they understand what clients are looking for, what that approach should look for, and so that's a perspective that could provide you some mentorship and development that I wouldn't forget about.
And I really agree with that too, because I think Terry's role as in-house GC, You tell people the teams that you want, and the partners will respond. Give, like you said earlier, giving opportunity to associates to learn your business, and then giving them the ability to make a mistake, right? We always think, you know, associates think we were always perfect. You've got to give an associate the opportunity to make a mistake and to recover from it and to stick with them, because that's how they're going to learn. And if an in-house lawyer says, I want this associate on my matter, that creates huge opportunity and runway for them inside the law firm. And then I just had to tag on to what David said. Janet Jackson was who got me involved in public service. So she's like,
Is Yvette frozen? You're back.
I don't know what happened. Apologies, guys.
So we have a question from the audience about whether, you know, what's the role of law schools in helping students with this idea of business development and professional development?
Well, I'll chime in with there being a little delay. I would, you know, I've been saying this since I graduated from law school, which was, I won't tell you how long ago, but I think there is an obligation. And having graduated many years ago, I don't know if things have changed, but I think there is an obligation. I think there's an obligation not only to talk and teach more around business and professional development and what that means, but really how to use your law degree to the value of clients from a business perspective. And I do think some of that teaching was lacking, at least when I was there. But I think that's an important element, because again, if you remember, we are the laudable profession of law. And so our fundamental obligation, aside from following the law and upholding our ethics and obligations as members of the bar, is to provide value to our clients from a business and professional perspective. And that element of teaching how you do that and how you do that well, I think is an obligation that the law schools have.
I agree. I think for too many young lawyers, they come in and think just being smart is enough. And I don't know that law schools do a good job of giving them the skills to really know what it means to be a lawyer, what other skills you have to rely on besides just your intellect.
Great. So one of the ways to get people to partner, obviously, is that they have to stick around long enough to make partner. So how do you build a culture that encourages people, especially women and people of color, to stick around long enough and work hard enough to make partner?
Well, I'll take it. What I say you have to look at a law firm, as I had a wise managing partner of one of the large firms in Columbus tell me, it's a triangle and not a square. And so literally only about 30 to 40% of people who start out in law firms are going to make it all the way to partnership. And those numbers are felt more acutely when you have smaller numbers of women and diverse lawyers entering as associates. And so one of the things we have to do, one, is help them, if they want to go the distance, help them figure out the tools they need. And that means giving honest feedback early on, giving them early client-facing opportunities, giving them increasing responsibility on matters. And then as long as you've given them every opportunity, we have to be okay that sometimes they don't want to be a partner. You know, we laugh sometimes, they look at us and go, I don't want that. And that's fair. But if they want to make partner, we've got to give them the opportunity to do that. And that falls on us as leaders in the profession and inside our organizations to do that. I'm gonna call on Jennifer.
I think that it is so important to have a continuing dialogue with the associates to make sure to see what they're lacking, what are they not happy with, what are we not happy with, in order to continue that job satisfaction. The other thing is knowing that different things happen in your life, and firms need to be flexible enough and compassionate enough to respond to those different instances. I know that we're going to talk about how difficult it can be with the demanding work schedules and having kids and all kinds of different external demands. I think the pandemic has opened our eyes to how much flexibility we can have and still work effectively. But I do think that we need to have constant check-ins, dialogue, make sure that they're on the track that they want to be, that they are satisfied, and and again, it's our obligation to make those things happen, so that it's in everybody's best interest if you have somebody who's doing well, thriving, and successful in the organization. So just a lot of communication.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Before I was at 3 law firms before joining Barnes 11 years ago, and in those 3 other law firms, I was the only Asian lawyer in the firm, and so there were not a lot of folks who looked like me or who were brought up like I was, and so you had to identify those lawyers from whom you could get feedback on a regular basis about your performance and expectations. And one thing I learned early on, if you didn't ask, sometimes you just weren't going to get it. And so be aggressive about talking to a partner after a project, or even a senior associate that you're working with, about how you did on a project. What could I have done better? How can I improve? Can I work with you again? Because that's how you develop your pathway to professionalism. And you just need that feedback. And sometimes, I remember being afraid to ask sometimes, because it's not always comfortable hearing advice. And but it was something that I repeatedly, and I actually sometimes would call opposing counsel after we closed a transaction or had a matter and say, hey, it was good working with you. I'm kind of new at this, and is there anything you tell me that I should do differently? And you know what? If you ask, people are going to tell you. They're quite frankly honored that you're asking them what their thoughts are. So I've never been afraid to do that.
And just a quick follow-up to that, I think something you mentioned about soliciting feedback and talking to the senior associates in your group or in your firm is really important. You're oftentimes going to feel more comfortable with them. They've worked with a partner before, can give you a lot of advice and insight if maybe that comfort level isn't quite there with a partner yet, as a first step.
And if I might add on too, having people outside of the law firm that are lawyers in big law can be helpful too. I have a number of associates or young partners who will say, without divulging client confidences, like, I've had this partner that I have issues with, and no matter what I do, I just feel like I'm always being overly criticized. Have a network outside of your firm where you can just kind of, level set, like, what advice do you have for me? Is this normal behavior? Why do you think he's treating me this way? It allows you to hear from a neutral source who's not inside your law firm. That can also be helpful.
That's a great point, because sometimes you could just blame yourself, thinking that you did something wrong, and so this person is being fair, but maybe that's not always the case. And so, Jennifer, you touched on the beginning of a big topic with all this, and that's really the commitment of a career, and how do you balance that with family and with maybe you have hobbies, maybe you're an artist. How do you balance all of those things?
The law can be a pretty demanding profession, to understate it completely. So I think that, first of all, we have evolved so much. Just an anecdote, I had my daughter 15 years ago, and when her father was an attorney at the time, I took 3 months, he took 2 days. Fast forward to this past year, we have had 4 male associates in my group each take 2-month paternity leaves. So I think that speaks volumes for finally getting a little bit more equity. It's more parent leave than just everything's expected to be on the mother, the woman. So I think that because our technology has evolved, there's so much more flexibility now. And so you can carve out kind of your own day. If you have small children and you want to pick up those kids and have dinner with them, get them ready for bed, and then hit the computer again at 8 o'clock at night, you can do that now. And I know our firm wholly supports that. And especially with the attorneys in my group, a lot of whom have small children, I tell them, I don't care where you are, if you're in the office, if you're at home, what time of day you're working on things, whatever, I want them to be happy, because again, continuing with our theme, we want to develop people who are happy in the firm, who who can provide value in the way that they can, and with most flexibility. And I think the pandemic has just really made us all realize how we don't have to have that stereotype. When I first started at the firm, it was people left lights on in their office, sweaters on the backs of chairs, things like that. You were expected to be in the office all the time. And now I feel like we have a lot more flexibility. I still think it's important when an associate is starting out to make all those relationships at the firm. You need to have, get to know people, have that presence, but we've got a much more kind of mixture of carving out time for what you have to do to get done, and still being able to complete all the work and be a successful associate.
And I'll just chime in quickly. I have mixed emotions about the conversation around finding work-life balance. I don't think there is work-life balance. There just isn't. As Jennifer said, the law is a demanding profession, no matter how you practice, whether you're at a law firm, whether you're solo, whether you have 100 clients or 2 clients. It's just a demanding profession. And whether you're male or female, there will always be demands on you that are aggressive. So I think if the goal is work-life balance, you're in the wrong profession. Having said that, for all of the reasons that Jennifer pointed out and many, many more, we're light years ahead of where we used to be. And you certainly can create a professional work life that works for you. I listened to a very interesting adjunct general who is a female, first female adjunct general in the country. And she said, my career was not a ladder, it was a jungle gym. So you may step over sideways for a minute, up 2 rungs, back 1, all around. So you have to accept that your career is going to be a jungle gym, and there are times when the balance is going to work, and there are times when it's not. But are you advancing? Are you learning? Are you growing? And if you're doing those 3 things in whatever format, then you have struck the right balance.
The only thing that I would add to that is, you can either pick a law firm or let a law firm pick you. And part of the message there is that there are still firms out there that demand that they be number 1 in your life. And when I ran an office of my last firm, I used to tell people, if you want to put your law firm first, this is probably not the right place for you. I want you to put your family and your faith before the law firm, and we'll have a nice balance, because that's the culture we have here. And I think it makes a difference. And so you've got to do that. The second thing is you got to set boundaries. Early on in my career, I was available 24/7. Then I realized, I need a day to myself and my family. And so I don't answer the phone at all on Sunday. And my clients know that. If I go on vacation, I let them know in advance, hey, I'm going on vacation. I'll be available, for these limited times. And if there's an emergency, of course, I'll make myself available, but I need this time. And I'm pretty disciplined about doing that, because if I don't, then there are other prices to pay with my family. And that's really important to me.
The past year has been filled with difficult conversations at organizations of all kinds around race. And I'm sure that law firms have gone through that same process. And so how have your firms helped women, but also especially people of color, feel like they fit in and feel like their voices are heard in these conversations? And how has that been carried out at your firms?
So you're right, Katie. This summer, like no other, this spring, actually, since May 25th, has just been, it's been a really hard time, both inside the law firm, and I think as really a reflection, given our profession, time to really look at our lack of diversity. And so, when we look at our diverse lawyers coming in, one of the things we have to do is create community for them. It's not enough to say, oh, we're all the same, or somebody says, oh, I don't see color. Well, that's not true. Right. So what we've done at our law firm is create community. We have firm-wide affinity groups. We do quarterly calls. We want to make sure that no matter what office you're in, you feel connected to your community, whether that's Black lawyers, Hispanic lawyers, LGBTQ plus lawyers, or women. We want you feeling connected. And I think that's important. I think diverse lawyers, when they come into a firm, they need to be able to look up and see what success looks like. If they don't see people in the leadership who look like them, who are succeeding in the law firm, it's hard for them to believe they can be successful too. So it really takes intentional effort. And as I said at the beginning of the call, it takes us saying to our partners, I don't want to see an all-white team. I want to see where are the diverse members on your team. I know you may like this kid because they went to your same law school. They grew up in your hometown, but I want you to work with people who don't look like you, who you aren't familiar with, who come from an experience different than you. That's really how we stretch and grow the profession. But it does take intentional effort and intentional focus every day, because as humans, we're going to default to what makes us most comfortable. And sometimes that isn't people who are different from us.
Yeah, just to key into what Yvette was saying, in preparing for today's remarks, that was my first bullet was all D&I efforts start with, number one, intentionality. And I think oftentimes as lawyers, especially in an in-house environment, everyone's, uncomfortable. We shouldn't talk about it. You can't talk about percentages. You can't talk about numbers. You can't. Well, the first thing I said to my organization, and when we dove into the D&I effort with real Ernst probably 4 or 5 years ago, was you have to talk about it. You have to know what your numbers are. You have to know where your people are. You have to understand what goal you're trying to achieve. And we as lawyers standing up and saying it's okay to talk about it provides more freedom than you can ever imagine. And so until we as a community of lawyers say we've got to be open to the dialogue and support the conversation, organizations and your clients won't do it either. So that's first and foremost, is being very intentional about your efforts, not only in recruiting lawyers of color, but making sure that, as Yvette said, they feel that community and that sense of being part of an inclusive environment. Secondly, I think you have to take it personally. Once you know your numbers, once you know what your goal is, you've got to take it personally. Your partners have to take it personally, and the other associates have to take it personally. They each have to agree, identify, and actively understand that they've got an individual role in making sure that their colleagues around them feel included, or the other employees in their organization feel included. So it's got to be intentional, it's got to be personal, and then the partners and leaders within the law firm and within the large organizations have to ensure that they're looking out for bias and the development of those associates of color, and make sure that those are seen and dealt with, so that those associates, whether it's an employee or a law firm, have the opportunity to grow.
Yeah, at FBT, since we've always had diversity and inclusion has always been a priority, we've been focusing too on equity. So diversity, equity, and inclusion as well. After, I think there was a lot of looking in and figuring out what can we do that's valuable, that will start driving the conversation. Because to your point, Terry, these are uncomfortable conversations, and we've had a series of discussions, presentations at FBT, so that you can be aware of this implicit bias and the different things that and talk about these situations. And are the members of our team, of our firm, who have suffered through some of those types of situations, to talk and to have an exchange and what this felt like and what it meant to them. I think too, we do have to have concrete numbers. You have to have some sort of goal. And to that end, FBT has achieved Mansfield Rule certification. And so what that provides is that for at least 70% of the management positions that are considered, that 30% of those candidates will be women. And so to at least try to start putting some numbers in that we can have as a goal, as we're all trying to achieve more equity in all the firms.
I'm glad you raised that issue because, you know, one of the challenges that we have in a busy practice, we don't take time to listen to our colleagues. And the one-on-one conversations and listening with our colleagues is perhaps one of the most beneficial things we can do. I've always believed you only make change one person at a time. You don't do it as a large group. And so as a firm, we have been fostering those conversations so that we can really listen to hear what other people are saying. And it feels like, you know, we have to almost scaffold our way out of this because it is going to be incremental, because we have to facilitate that understanding. And whether it's the leadership of an office or the leadership of a firm or individuals, we have to do it collectively. And the only way you do that is by having those conversations and truly, truly listening.
And can you just share what specifically happens in those conversations? What are the things that people need to be sharing for this to be effective?
So, you know, it's partly it's perspective. And, you know, it came to a realization for me that, you know, early on in my career, as a Filipino American, I had prejudices and biases against me that, you know, were there, both at the State House and within law firms. But that largely went away. And it really has. I haven't had that experience in the last decade. But for my African American partners, it's an everyday occurrence. So why is it like that? And that's something that, you know, I needed to hear, because while it's gone away for me, it hasn't for them. And so that's the type of dialogue that we have. It's authentic, it's real, it's hard to hear, and it's tough. But that's what has to happen.
And to follow up,
I would
go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Terry.
I was just going to take the flip side of that, is that I think obviously it's very important that there be an atmosphere of sharing, but more importantly, it's the flip side, it's the listening. I learned so much this summer from listening to my colleagues of color. And so it's got to be both ways. You've got to be able to have an environment where people are willing to share their perspective, and that was a learning. Getting people to feel comfortable to share when they're uncomfortable. But more importantly, when they are willing to share, being able to hear it and really learn from their experience, and take that learning into action. If there was anything that frustrated me more, and there was a lot that frustrated me this summer, was a lot of talk and not a lot of action. How do you take that listening and that learning and turn it into action within your organization, whether it's a firm or a company or the community at large? So I think it's both sides of the equation. I think that's probably obvious, but I think definitely worth noting.
Yeah, and I agree, Terry and David. I think we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. This summer, after the George Floyd murder, I had so many of my white friends and colleagues say, I just don't know what to say. Well, you just start talking. And as long as you're not saying there's no racism, there's not a wrong thing you can say. You just have to be willing to start the conversation. And then on the flip side, I had to say to some of my young Black lawyers that, listen, if people come to you and they want to have a conversation, then you've got to give them grace. because they may not use the right words. They may say things that you find insensitive, but if they're coming to you from a place of real authenticity and wanting to learn, then you give them grace and you engage in the conversation. The legal profession for too long has just had this cloud over it where we can't seem to reflect the diversity of our communities. We've been talking about diversity and inclusion since I graduated from law school over 30 years ago. And we've got to get past these check the box programs and really face in our law firms, in our companies, why are Black and brown lawyers not succeeding at the same rate as their white counterparts? It's not lack of intellect. It really is lack of opportunity, mentorship, and sponsorship. And that's really what has to change.
So much of the conversation that I've heard around diversity is focused on people of color themselves and what can we do for them, or what do they need to do? But so much of it is what needs to happen with the majority. What does the majority need to hear? How do they need to change? How have there been any concrete changes in practices at your firms since all of the movement of this summer, the awakening, the reckoning, whatever you want to call it? How have things changed for how you do things?
I can't really say for our firm that things have changed. I mean, we are still following our same path of recruiting, retaining, and advancing diverse lawyers. What I think has changed, and this, as I think David said earlier, is going to take time. What has changed is the response from clients. This summer, I kid you not, I had so many clients saying, I want a Black lawyer on this matter. I want a Black lawyer on this matter. And I was like, time out. Our Black lawyers are fully prescribed. Now, I get that you want to have Black lawyers and we want to give them to you, but let's talk about a long-term strategy. Like, how do we introduce Black lawyers to you? How do we get them on your matters? We're just not going to take them off of matters they're on and plop them onto your matters. And so the challenge for us now as a profession is to make sure that this attention to racial equity is something that is sustained long-term by what Terry said earlier. Corporate clients investing in diverse associates, knowing who they are, giving them opportunity, and the law firms bringing them in the door and making sure that they're successful, saying to the senior partners, your success is dependent on their success, because you wouldn't hire them if they didn't have the skills to do the job. Terry?
Yeah, I was just going to really focus on that. I was really just going to focus on that, and it really, the recruitment part of it, the retention part of it is, again, it goes back to intentionality. I can't tell you, and it's a domino effect. The recruitment part for me, and you'll hear a lot about pipeline, right? Pipeline. If I hear that word again, I'm really going to get angry. It's not about the pipeline. You're just looking, if you can't find diverse, talented lawyers, you're just looking down the wrong pipe. And I learned that lesson in a very harsh way. When I took over the role as GC at Ohio Health, we had 0 attorneys of color in our organization. And the argument that was always made was, we can't find qualified healthcare lawyers of color. Well, if you narrow your scope, first I got to find lawyers that want to be in-house. So then you go to here. Then I want to find lawyers that are good healthcare lawyers. Then you go to here, right? Then I want to find a lawyer who's a healthcare lawyer who wants to come in, who is of color. So then you go to here. If you narrow your pipeline so small, then of course you aren't going to be able to recruit. So it wasn't until I decided that you need to put your preconceived ideas of qualifications for your roles aside. And my mantra moving forward, the minute I took this role, is I want smart, qualified lawyers, period. And once I did that, the number of qualified candidates that came across my desk increased exponentially. And it's within 2 years, I went from 0% attorneys of color to almost 30% attorneys of color. And it was merely from thinking about it differently. And I think that's true in all of the arenas as it relates to ensuring that we are bringing lawyers of color into our community, into our law firms, and into our organization. Is to think about it differently and to grow. Think of it as an opportunity to grow our network, not to require that they come into ours, but that we fall into theirs.
So Katie, let me add this if I could. I mean, I think the question is what have we done internally? And I think we're more critically evaluating how we look at things to Terry's point, but it's what we're doing externally that impresses me the most. You know, we sometimes underestimate the influence we have as lawyers and the circles that we encounter. And so when you serve on a board, are you asking those tough questions of the rest of the board? You know, are we paying attention to these issues? I was asked to be on a board last year, and I said, sure, I'll join the board only if you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, which they had never had before. We found out nationally they had never done that with their adjacent organizations. And so now I am now chair of that committee, but those are the types of things that we have to do. And it's, you know, it's that, you know, being comfortable with the uncomfortable. I want people to stay uncomfortable because it motivates them. And so that means that in every sphere that we touch, whether it's our law school going back, whether it's a board we serve on, whether it's the gym we work out at, are we paying attention to those issues and are we activating? That's how we have to look at it.
And just for FBT, oh, I'm sorry, just some of the things that, you know, we are focused on diverse attorneys from an even earlier stage now. As Noelle mentioned, we have given scholarships now to try to advocate for those diverse attorneys from the law school stage. Focusing again on recruiting, making it part of the conversation every single time. And the biggest thing with firms is the clients are demanding it. And lots of times if you're doing any kind of response to requests for proposals, they want to know how many attorneys you have that are women, minority, LGBTQ+. So they're asking those questions. So law firms have to respond to it.
Yeah, and I would, again, from the in-house perspective, commend the law firm partners to reach out to your clients and ask them to mentor your associates of color or your diverse associates who may need an outside mentor. Again, I think that's an obligation that that we have, and I think could be a win-win for both sides. So I think the law firm setting can really use their client base as an opportunity to help develop and educate their associates.
Well, this has been a terrific conversation. I really appreciate all of the perspectives you've shared. And I want to turn this over to Bill Nolan for a final question.
All right, thank you, Katie. And thank you to all the panelists. What I'd like to ask each of you, or whatever number Katie says we have time for, just to give the attendees, you know, what's sort of one concrete something you can go do this week kind of thing to move the needle. I agree with things, you know, I heard some from David, some from Yvette, as far as, you know, sort of the inherently incremental nature of this. And we've got, if you look at the list, we've got people who are older, people who are younger, people who are lawyers, people who are not, some are not even in the legal industry. So whether you're trying to speak to some of them or all of them, would just, you know, if you got like, when you walk away from here, what's one thing you can go do? Would love to hear that from some of you.
I'll say one thing that we did internally as an executive team at Ohio Health. Go to your LinkedIn profile, and whatever community you are, whether you're Caucasian, whether you're African American, whatever community other you put yourself in, see what percentage, if you're a Caucasian, see what percentage of your LinkedIn network is of color. And if it is anything less than a sizable percentage, I won't put a number on it, I would say start building your network of others. And we did that internally, and it was not only an eye-opening experience personally, but professionally, it was an incredible experience and allowed me to build connections and create a network that I didn't realize I didn't have. So that's just a small, simple thing, but I found it really fascinating and very helpful.
If you are a person in your organization who has position or power, I'd like you to commit today to reach out to a racially diverse person in your organization that you are going to sponsor, that you are going to make it your mission to help that person be successful. It starts by getting to know them, invite them to a virtual coffee, get them on your matters, but to take responsibility. You know the old fish story, it just takes one. The starfish story, it just takes one. And so if you do that today, watch how we can fundamentally change this profession.
And just to tag onto that real quick, the first part of our conversation focused so much on mentorship. And so my advice would be for those of you who are in a position to mentor, go out and seek a person that you know is not in your network to try to mentor. And the opposite, if you are an associate, look for somebody who you want to be an advocate or you want to connect with and reach out to that person.
My ask of you is to volunteer on a board, in the community, anywhere. I mean, to me, that's been the most rewarding part of my practice, is serving on boards and volunteering. And that's where I've met the most interesting people. Certainly, you know, I've encountered folks who ultimately become clients, but to me, that's the most rewarding. And I feel like I've leveraged my law practice, my position in the firm to help the community. And I feel very strongly about giving back. And I think that's the one thing I'd ask you to do, because it does make the most difference.
All right, thank you. Great answers. I wrote those down. Appreciate that, and thank you, Katie. Barnes and Thornburg is delighted to be a part of this. One of the, you know, dialogue by itself is not enough, but we do think it's really important. And actually, shortly before this program, I see some of the same attendees. We had a talk with Dr. Amos Giora. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. He's a professor at the University of Utah and the child of 2 Holocaust survivors, and has written books on sort of bystander mentality and the dynamics of that. And he was talking about sort of in the context of racism. And, you know, it's sort of chilling when you sort of think about our capacity to let things go. And it was really very challenging and compelling conversation, as was this. So again, I want to thank when Katie reached out on this series, it was an easy yes. So we're delighted to be a part of it. And thank all the panelists and CEO Magazine. Ray, you're going to close us out, right?
Yes, thanks, Bill. I want to thank all our panelists, Terry and David and Jennifer and Yvette. Thank you for your candid conversation. This is what's important, is that we give opportunities for people to learn and for you to share real information that can be useful. So thank you for doing that. We want to thank our sponsors, Barnes and Thornburg, Frost, Brown and Todd, for supporting this initiative. And I want to just thank my CEO staff for all the work that they do. We're going to take this conversation, and it's not only recorded here for future use, but we're going to do a condensed and edited version that will appear in the February issue of Columbus CEO. So it will be made available, the context of it made available to a wider audience. It's important that we get this message out, because no matter what we think we thought we were doing, we need to do more. We also will have part 3 of Diverse Leaders in Law. That will be in early April. We will be sharing details through all of the different channels of Columbus CEO, whether it's our newsletter, website, print publication, and the other means. And in the meantime, thank you for attending and take care.